Hello everybody, it's me again. I had wanted to get this video done a little over a week ago. It's the second half of Matthew chapter 2, which I had started in the Ruler out of Bethlehem video, but life happened, and so I'm doing the video now. Just so we're all kind of on the same track and everybody knows where we are, I'm going to start with verse 1, which I ended the previous video in verse 8. I read verses 1 through 8. And so this one is basically about what's going on in verses 9 through 23 and different questions that came up with different verses as far as where they got the prophecies from. But just so we're all kind of caught up with what's going on, instead of just starting in the middle at verse 9, I'm going to go ahead and read the whole thing over. And it's Matthew chapter 2, and I'm starting in verse 1. It says, "Now when Yahusha was born in Bethlehem of Yehud, in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came Magi from the east to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he that is born King of the Yahudim? For we have seen his star rising in the east, and are come to worship him. When Herod the king had heard these things, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And when he had gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, he demanded of them where Mashiach should be born. And they said unto him, In Bethlehem of Yehud, for thus it is written by the prophet, And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Yehudah, are not the least among the princes of Yehudah, for out of you shall come a governor that shall rule my people Yashael. Then Herod, when he had privately called the Magi, inquired of them diligently what time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, Go and search diligently for the young child, and when ye have found him, bring me word again, that I may come and worship him also." Now, that was 1 through 8, and I'm going to start in verse 9. It says, "When they had heard the king, they departed, and lo, the star which they saw rising in the east went before them, till it came and stood over where the young child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceeding great joy. And when they were come into the house, they saw the young child with Miriam his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented unto him gifts, gold, and frankincense, and myrrh. And being warned of El in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed into their own country another way. And when they were departed, behold, the angel of Yahuwah appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, Arise, and take the young child and his mother, and flee into Mitzrayim, and be there until I bring you word. For Herod will seek the young child to destroy him. When he arose, he took the young child and his mother by night, and departed into Mitzrayim, and was there until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken of Yahuwah by the prophet, saying, Out of Mitzrayim have I called my son. Then Herod, when he saw that he was mocked of the Magi, was exceeding wroth, and sent forth and slew all the children that were in Bethlehem, and in all the coast thereof, from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had diligently inquired of the Magi. Then was fulfilled that which was spoken by Yirmeyahu the prophet, saying, In Ramah was there a voice heard, lamentation and weeping, and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and would not be comforted because they are not. But when Herod was dead, behold, an angel of Yahuwah appeared in a dream to Joseph in Mitzrayim, saying, Arise, and take the young child and his mother, and go into the land of Yashael, for they are dead which sought the young child's life. And he arose and took the young child and his mother, and came into the land of Yashael. But when he heard that Archelaus did reign in Yehud, in the room of his father Herod, he was afraid to go thither. Notwithstanding, being warned of El in a dream, he turned aside into the parts of Galilee, and he came and dwelt in a city called Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophets, He shall be called a Netzari. Now, there are several things that jumped out in these verses, but for the sake of time and trying to keep the video short and all my extra commentary and wordiness down, I'm just gonna stick with some of the verses that they have footnotes for and backup scriptures to kind of let you know where they pulled these verses from. And I am going to start with let's see. Ooh. 14 and 15, it says, when he arose, he took the young child and his mother by night and departed into Mitzrayim, which is Egypt, and was there until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken of Yahuwah by the prophet, saying, out of Mitzrayim have I called my son. Now this verse, that part of the verse, out of Mitzrayim have I called my son, was pulled out of Hosea chapter 11, verses 1 and 2. And what's interesting about that is Hosea 11 makes it very clear that the Father is talking about Israel as a whole and not about one specific person. And I'm getting ready to go to that. I'm going to reread that. Let me see. It says, this is Hosea 11, and I'm going to read verses 1 through 7. It says, I fell in love with Israel when he was still a child, and I have called him my son ever since Egypt. Thus were they called, but they went their own way. They sacrificed to Baalim and offered to carved images. I have pampered Ephraim, taking them in my arms, but they have ignored my healing care. I drew them with human ties, with cords of love, but I seemed to them as one who imposed a yoke on their jaws. Though I was offering them food, no. They returned to the land of Egypt, and Assyria is their king. Because they refused to repent, a sword shall descend upon their towns and consume their limbs and devour them because of their designs. For my people persists in its defection from me. When it is summoned upward, it does not rise at all. Hosea 11, 1 through 7 is talking about Israel as a whole. It's not talking about one specific person. More specifically and importantly, it's not talking about Yahusha at all. This verse was not about him. It didn't have anything to do with him. It was literally about Israel and what the Father was getting ready to do to Israel as a result of them continuing to disregard his word and do what they wanted to do, them having false gods and all this other stuff that they had going on. And so that's what Hosea 11 was about. So I don't understand why they took that verse and tried to attribute it to this prophecy being about Yahusha, because it wasn't. It was a statement that the Father was making about Israel and what he was going to have done to them. And all of that goes together. And just to continue on in verses 8 through, I guess I'll just finish reading. It says, how can I give you up, O Ephraim? How surrender you, O Israel? How can I make you like Admah, render you like Zeboim? I have had a change of heart. All my tenderness is stirred. I will not act on my wrath, will not turn to destroy Ephraim. For I am God, not man, the Holy One in your midst. I will not come in fury. The Lord will roar like a lion, and they shall march behind him. When he roars, his children shall come fluttering out of the west. They shall flutter from Egypt like sparrows, from the land of Assyria like doves, and I will settle them in their homes, declares the Lord. So even though he was giving them over to Egypt and Assyria because of what they had done, he wasn't going to allow for Ephraim to be completely and totally annihilated and destroyed, like the people. He wasn't going to allow that to happen. But he did have them deported by Assyria. He sent the kings of Assyria into Israel, which at that time was being referred to as Ephraim. And they were deported. Aram was deported. The people from Damascus, the Edomites, the Arameans in Damascus were deported. This didn't have anything to do with Yahusha. And so now, moving along, I am going to verses 17 and 18. It says, Then was fulfilled that which was spoken by Yirmiyahu the prophet, saying, In Ramah was there a voice heard, lamentation and weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and would not be comforted because they are not. Now they're saying that because Herod killed all these babies, searching for Yahusha, because the Magi didn't return to him, and he was upset, and because he really wanted to know where this Mashiach was, because he was afraid that the Mashiach would grow up and overrule him and overturn him. He wanted Yahusha killed, according to the Gospels. And so he had all of the children from 2 years, all of the Hebrew children from 2 years and younger. He had all of them killed. And so this verse, it says, In Ramah was there a voice heard, lamentation and weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and would not be comforted because they are not. And it says that at this point, when he's having all of these babies killed, was when what was spoken to Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled. Now, where they got that from was Jeremiah 31, verses 15 through 17, which I'm getting ready to read now. Hold on, let me go to it. It says, Thus said the Lord, a cry is heard in Ramah, wailing, bitter weeping, Rachel weeping for her children. She refuses to be comforted for her children who are gone. Thus said the Lord, restrain your voice from weeping, your eyes from shedding tears, for there is a reward for your labor, declares the Lord. They shall return from the enemy's land, and there is hope for your future, declares the Lord. Your children shall return to their country. That part in and of itself, in Ramah was there a voice heard, lamentation and weeping and great mourning. That part in and of itself was not the prophecy. That was something that the Father was saying was happening. The prophecy, what was going to be fulfilled later, was the fact that the Father was going to return them to the land, because Rachel, the land basically that he's referring to as Rachel, is weeping because Israel was deported. Her seed, her grandchildren, Rachel's grandchildren were deported. Israel split, and so you have Israel divided into two kingdoms. You have Israel, which is referred to as Ephraim, which was one of Joseph's sons, who was Rachel's son. And then you have the kingdom of Judah, which housed the kings from the line of David. And those were all basically, as far as Judah was concerned, Judah was Leah's son. And I might go into that a little later in the video, but basically, this didn't have anything to do with Herod killing babies. This was about the deportation of Israel again, and the Father saying that he was going to bring all of, not only just the ones that were deported from Israel, but also the ones that were later deported from Jerusalem back to Jerusalem. He was going to bring all of them back. And that didn't have anything to do with dead babies in the time that they were going through this issue in the Gospels with Rome and Greece and the Romans. It didn't have anything to do with them. This was a prophecy about the Father restoring the people that were deported back to Jerusalem from the Babylonian captivity, when he had them all exiled to Babylon. It says, I can hear Ephraim lamenting. You have chastised me, and I am chastised. Like a calf that has not been broken, receive me back. Let me return, for you, O Lord, are my God. Now that I have turned back, I am filled with remorse. Now that I am made aware, I strike my thigh. I am ashamed and humiliated, for I bear the disgrace of my youth. Truly Ephraim is a dear son to me, a child that is dandled. Whenever I have turned against him, my thoughts would dwell on him still. That is why my heart yearns for him. I will receive him back in love, declares the Lord. Again, this is talking about the Father bringing the people that were deported back to Jerusalem, back to Israel, back to the kingdom. He was bringing them back after their captivity. When their punishment was over, he was saying that the punishment basically wasn't going to last forever. Yes, Rachel, yes, they had been deported, and, so the land was weeping for the Israelites that had been taken captive and exiled and sent into Assyria. They were sent into Egypt. They were sent into just different lands altogether. They were sent a little bit of everywhere during the Assyrian captivity and during the Babylonian captivity, which followed. But the Father is saying that he was going to bring all of them back, and that's what that passage of Scripture was talking about. It didn't have anything to do with Herod. And just to kind of get some background, I wanted to read 2 Kings, which is where you kind of get an understanding of what was going on. It's 2 Kings 24 is where it starts. Hold on, I'm trying to get to it now. It started before that because of some stuff that Manasseh did, but I'm going to start in 24. Let's look at my notes. It's 2 Kings 24, and I'm going to start in verse 8. It says, I'm going to start in verse 1. It says, in his days, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came up, and Jehoiakim became his vassal for 3 years. Then he turned and rebelled against him. The Lord let loose against him the raiding bands of the Chaldeans, Aramaeans, Moabites, and Ammonites. He let them loose against Judah to destroy it, in accordance with the word that the Lord had spoken through his servants the prophets. All this befell Judah at the command of the Lord, who banished them from his presence because of all the sins that Manasseh had committed, and also because of the blood of the innocent that he shed. For he filled Jerusalem with the blood of the innocent, and the Lord would not forgive. The other events of Jehoiakim's reign and all his actions are recorded in the annals of the kings of Judah. Jehoiakim slept with his fathers, and his son Jehoiakim succeeded him as king. The king of Egypt did not venture out of his country again, for the king of Babylon had seized all the land that had belonged to the king of Egypt, from the Wadi of Egypt to the river Euphrates. And now I'm in verse 8. It says, Jehoiakim was 18 years old when he became king, and he reigned 3 months in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Nehushta, daughter of Elnathan of Jerusalem. He did what was displeasing to the Lord, just as his father had done. At that time, the troops of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon marched against Jerusalem, and the city came under siege. King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon advanced against the city while his troops were besieging it. Thereupon King Jehoiakim of Judah, along with his mother and his courtiers, commanders, and officers, surrendered to the king of Babylon. The king of Babylon took him captive in the 8th year of his reign. He carried off from Jerusalem all the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the royal palace. He stripped off all the golden decorations in the temple of the Lord, which King Solomon of Israel had made, as the Lord had warned. He exiled all of Jerusalem, all the commanders and all the warriors, 10,000 exiles, as well as all the craftsmen and smiths. Only the poorest people in the land were left. He deported Jehoiakim to Babylon, and the king's wives and officers and the notables of the land were brought as exiles from Jerusalem to Babylon. All the able men, to the number of 7,000, all of them warriors trained for battle, and 1,000 craftsmen and smiths, were brought to Babylon as exiles by the king of Babylon. And the king of Babylon appointed Mattaniah, Jehoiakim's uncle, king in his place, changing his name to Zedekiah. Zedekiah was 21 years old when he became king, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Hamutal, daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah. He did what was displeasing to the Lord, just as Jehoiakim had done. Indeed, Jerusalem and Judah were a cause of anger for the Lord, so that he cast them out of his presence. Zedekiah rebelled against the king of Babylon, and in the 9th year of his reign, on the 10th day of the 10th month, Nebuchadnezzar moved against Jerusalem with his whole army. He besieged it, and they built towers against it all around. The city continued in a state of siege until the 11th year of King Zedekiah. By the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine had become acute in the city. There was no food left for the common people. Then the wall of the city was breached. All the soldiers left the city by night through the gate between the double walls, which is near the king's garden. The Chaldeans were all around the city, and the king set out for the Arabah. But the Chaldean troops pursued the king, and they overtook him in the steps of Jericho, as his entire force left him and scattered. They captured the king and brought him before the king of Babylon at Riblah, and they put him on trial. They slaughtered Zedekiah's sons before his eyes. Then Zedekiah's eyes were put out. He was chained in bronze fetters, and he was brought to Babylon. On the 7th day of the 5th month, that was the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, Nebuzaradan, the chief of the guards and officer of the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. He burned the house of the Lord, the king's palace, and all the houses of Jerusalem. He burned down the house of every notable person. The entire Chaldean force that was with the chief of the guard tore down the walls of Jerusalem on every side. The remnant of the people that was left in the city, the defectors who had gone over to the king of Babylon, and the remnant of the population were taken into exile by Nebuzaradan, the chief of the guards. But some of the poorest in the land were left by the chief of the guards to be vine dressers and field hands. The Chaldeans broke up the bronze columns of the house of the Lord, the stands and the bronze tank that was in the house of the Lord, and they carried the bronze away to Babylon. They also took all the pails, scrapers, snuffers, ladles, and all the other bronze vessels used in the service. The chief of the guards took whatever was of gold and whatever was of silver, fire pans and sprinkling bowls. The 2 columns, the 1 tank, and the stands that Solomon provided for the house of the Lord, all these objects contained bronze beyond weighing. The 1 column was 18 cubits high. It had a bronze capital above it. The height of the capital was 3 cubits, and there was a meshwork decorated with pomegranates about the capital, all made of bronze. And the like was true of the other column with its meshwork. The chief of the guards also took Sariah, the chief priest, Zephaniah, the deputy priest, and the 3 guardians of the threshold. And from the city he took a eunuch who was in command of the soldiers, 5 royal privy counselors who were present in the city, the scribe of the army commander who was in charge of mustering the people of the land, and 60 of the common people who were inside the city. Nebuzaradan, the chief of the guards, took them and brought them to the king of Babylon at Riblah. The king of Babylon had them struck down and put to death at Riblah in the region of Hamath. Thus Judah was exiled from its land. King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon put Gedaliah, son of Ahikam, son of Shaphan, in charge of the people whom he left in the land of Judah. When the officers of the troops and their men heard that the king of Babylon had put Gedaliah in charge, they came to Gedaliah at Mizpah with Ishmael, son of Nethaniah, Johanan, son of Kareah, Seraiah, son of Tanhumeth, the Netophathite, and Jaazaniah, son of the Maacite, together with their men. Gedaliah reassured them and their men, saying, "Do not be afraid of the servants of the Chaldeans. Stay in the land and serve the king of Babylon, and it will go well with you." In the 7th month, Ishmael, son of Nethaniah, son of Elishama, who was of royal descent, came with 10 men, and they struck down Gedaliah, and he died. They also killed the Judeans and the Chaldeans who were present with him at Mizpah. And all the people, young and old, and the officers of the troops, sent out and went to Egypt because they were afraid of the Chaldeans. So there's the backstory. Part of it anyway. There's the backstory. They were deported. And so they were gone. Which is why Rachel was weeping for her children, and why there was a great mourning and lamentation was because they were exiled, they were killed, their houses were all burned to the ground by one of the Babylonian chiefs. The house of the Lord was burnt down, the king's palace was burnt down, all that stuff, all that goes together, and that's where that came from. And it talks a little bit more, it goes a little more into detail, or gives just a little extra details in 2 Chronicles 36, which I'm also going to read. Let me see. And I'm going to start in verse 11, where it is talking about King Zedekiah. It's 2 Chronicles 36, verses 11 through 21. It says, Zedekiah was 21 years old when he became king, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. He did what was displeasing to the Lord his God. He did not humble himself before the prophet Jeremiah, who spoke for the Lord. This is where you know for a fact that this was what Jeremiah was talking about. He also rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar, who made him take an oath by God. He stiffened his neck and hardened his heart so as not to turn to the Lord God of Israel. All the officers of the priests and the people committed many trespasses, following all the abominable practices of the nations. They polluted the house of the Lord, which he had consecrated in Jerusalem. The Lord God of their fathers had sent word to them through his messengers daily without fail, for he had pity on his people and his dwelling place. But they mocked the messengers of God and disdained his words and taunted his prophets until the wrath of the Lord against his people grew beyond remedy. He therefore brought the king of the Chaldeans upon them, who killed their youths by the sword in their sanctuary. He did not spare youth, maiden, elder, or graybeard, but delivered all into his hands. All the vessels of the house of God, large and small, and the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king and his officers were all brought to Babylon. They burned the house of God and tore down the wall of Jerusalem, burned down all its mansions, and consigned all its precious objects to destruction. Those who survived the sword he exiled to Babylon, and they became his and his sons' servants till the rise of the Persian kingdom, in fulfillment of the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah, until the land paid back its Sabbaths. As long as it lay desolate, it kept Sabbath, till 70 years were completed. Now, there's the rest of that. And verse 22 goes on to talk about when they were going to be delivered and who the Father sent to deliver them, because again, Jeremiah, if we were to go back to Jeremiah 31, which is where they got that verse, in Matthew chapter 2 verses 15. If we're to go back to Jeremiah 31, which I'm doing now, in verses 16 and 17, it says, Thus said the Lord, restrain your voice from weeping, your eyes from shedding tears, for there is a reward for your labor, declares the Lord. They shall return from the enemy's land, and there is hope for your future, declares the Lord. Your children shall return to their country. That was fulfilled according to 2 Chronicles. King Cyrus of Persia was the one that was going to fulfill that. It says, And in the first year of King Cyrus of Persia, when the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah was fulfilled, the Lord roused the spirit of King Cyrus of Persia to issue a proclamation throughout his realm by word of mouth and in writing as follows. Thus said King Cyrus of Persia, the Lord God of heaven has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and has charged me with building him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Any one of you of all his people, the Lord his God be with him, and let him go up. And you can read more about that in Ezra and Nehemiah. I'm not going to, for the sake of not having an extra long video. But it goes into great detail as far as King Cyrus's proclamation, and then King Darius later having it carried out, and Ezra going back with several people to rebuild all of the different gates, the horse gate, the fish gate, all the different gates, and the rebuilding the temple and all that, and everything that King Cyrus sent with them as far as the people, the exiles and stuff that he all sent home, and the gold and the silver and the bronze and all of the things that were originally taken out of the house of the Lord. He gave back to them to put back into the house of the Father when he sent them to go rebuild God's house. Let me see. I'm going to go to Isaiah 44, where it talks a little bit about what Isaiah had to say about it, what the Father said to Isaiah. And let's see. I'm going to start in 24, Isaiah 24, and I'm going to read through to chapter 45 on through to verse 13. But we're starting in verse 24 of 44. Thus said the Lord, your Redeemer, who formed you in the womb. It is I, the Lord, who made everything, who alone stretched out the heavens and unaided spread out the earth, who annul the omens of diviners and make fools of the augurs, who turn sages back and make nonsense of their knowledge, but confirm the word of my servant and fulfill the prediction of my messengers. It is I who say of Jerusalem, it shall be inhabited, and of the towns of Judah, they shall be rebuilt, and I will restore their ruined places. I who said to the deep, be dry, I will dry up your floods. And the same who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd. He shall fulfill all my purposes. He shall say of Jerusalem, she shall be rebuilt, and to the temple, you shall be founded again, which coincidentally is one of the things that the gospel records Yahushua having said. You're going to destroy the temple, and he was going to rebuild it in 3 days. But that's another topic for another video. Chapter 45, starting in verse 1, it says, Thus said the Lord to Cyrus, his anointed one, whose right hand he has grasped, treading down nations before him, ungirding the loins of kings, opening doors before him, and letting no gate stay shut. I will march before you and level the hills that loom up. I will shatter doors of bronze and cut down iron bars. I will give you treasures concealed in the dark and secret hoards, so that you may know that it is I, the Lord, the God of Israel, who call you by name. For the sake of my servant Jacob, Israel, my chosen one, I call you by name. I hail you by title, though you have not known me. I am the Lord, and there is none else beside me. There is no God. I engird you, though you have not known me, so that they may know from east to west that there is none but me. I am the Lord, and there is none else. I form light and create darkness. I make weal and create woe. I, the Lord, do all these things. Pour down, O skies, from above. Let the heavens rain down victory. Let the earth open up and triumph sprout. Yes, let vindication spring up. I, the Lord, have created it. Shame on him who argues with his maker, though not but a potsherd of earth. Shall the clay say to the potter, what are you doing? Your work has no handles. Shame on him who asks his father, what are you begetting? Or, woman, what are you bearing? Thus said the Lord, Israel's Holy One and Maker. Will you question me on the destiny of my children? Will you instruct me about the work of my hands? It was I who made the earth and created man upon it. My own hand stretched out the heavens, and I marshaled all their host. It was I who roused him for victory and who leveled all roads for him. He shall rebuild my city and let my exiled people go without price and without payment, said the Lord of hosts. Again, he's talking about Cyrus. Cyrus was the one that he was going to use to fulfill the prophecy in Jeremiah 31, verses 15 through 17. That's what that was talking about. It didn't have anything to do with King Herod. It didn't have anything to do with Rome. It didn't have anything to do with the Roman captivity and Jerusalem being at war with Rome and them battling back and forth and trying to get off from underneath Rome's thumb. It didn't have anything to do with that. Nothing to do with that at all. Didn't have anything to do with Herod. Didn't have anything to do with that. This was about Babylon and Assyria and the deportation of Ephraim and Judah and them being returned by way of King Cyrus of Babylon after the 70 years were completed, which was one of the prophecies that Daniel gave also when the Father showed Daniel what was going on when Daniel was doing all that fasting and praying. I've got another scripture that I wrote down. Jeremiah 29, verses 10 through 14, which also mentions the 70 years. Okay. I'm going to start in verse 4. This is Jeremiah 29. I'm going to start in verse 4. Thus said the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to the whole community which I exiled from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and live in them. Plant gardens and eat their fruit. Take wives and beget sons and daughters, and take wives for your sons, and give your daughters to husbands, that they may bear sons and daughters, multiply there, do not decrease, and seek the welfare of the city to which I have exiled you, and pray to the Lord in its behalf, for in its prosperity you shall prosper. For thus said the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, let not the prophets and diviners in your midst deceive you, and pay no heed to the dreams they dream. For they prophesy to you in my name falsely. I did not send them, declares the Lord. For thus said the Lord, when Babylon's 70 years are over, I will take note of you, and I will fulfill to you my promise of favor, to bring you back to this place. I'm going to read that again. For thus said the Lord, when Babylon's 70 years are over, I will take note of you, and I will fulfill to you my promise of favor, to bring you back to this place. Excuse me. For I am mindful of the plans I have made concerning you, declares the Lord. Plans for your welfare, not for disaster, to give you a hopeful future. When you call me and come and pray to me, I will give heed to you. You will search for me and find me, if only you seek me wholeheartedly. I will be at hand for you, declares the Lord, and I will restore your fortunes. And I will gather you from all the nations and from all the places to which I have banished you, declares the Lord. And I will bring you back to the place from which I have exiled you. That was fulfilled in the days of King Cyrus and King Darius and King Artaxerxes. King Cyrus was the one that the Father used to initiate them going back, and the house of the Lord being rebuilt, and all of the exiles returning, and Rachel no longer having to weep for her children that were gone, that had been deported, that had been killed, their houses burned down. All of that was fulfilled then, long before Yahusha would have even been a thing. So I don't understand why that was put in there. I don't understand why they used that verse to make it seem as though that prophecy was about Yahusha, because if part of the prophecy, if only part of the prophecy was about him, then none of it was about him. And I mean, that really is just, that's the way that I'm looking at this, because none of this had anything to do with Yahusha. And Yahusha didn't reign as a governor or a ruler or a king over Israel. He did not return any of the exiles to Jerusalem. He didn't do that. That's not what he did. And he was killed. And later on, he was lifted up and turned into a god, and people worship him today as if he is equal to the Father, as if he is equal to Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh. He's not. He's not. And just because, one thing that I have noticed in reading the Gospels is that in a lot of places where it mentions him in prophecies, it always says that certain things were done in order that a prophecy may be fulfilled, that it might be fulfilled, that something might come true. When everything, all of the prophecies that the Father gave to his prophets in the times of the Old Testament, they were fulfilled in the Old Testament. They were fulfilled then. And it's the way the Gospels kind of read is almost as if they basically, there was a group of different people that asserted themselves into positions to make their lives fit prophecies that didn't have anything to do with Yahusha, in order to sell him as something more than he was. And that's not okay. That's not okay that was done. And it brings a lot of questions to my mind. But anyway, moving along, another verse that I wanted to go over was Matthew chapter 2, verse 23. It says, "And he came and dwelt in a city called Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophets, he shall be called a Netzari." Now, the KJV says that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophets, he shall be called a Nazarene. A Nazarene and a Netzari are not the same thing. Nowhere in the Old Testament does it mention Nazareth and Nazarenes at all. They're really only mentioned in the New Testament. A Nazarite had nothing to do with being a Nazarene. Nazarite was simply a term, a Hebrew word that meant consecrated to the Father. It meant set apart, to be separated, which was what those men did when they separated themselves and they consecrated themselves to the Father. In service to the Father, they separated themselves from people, and they lived their lives a very specific way in order to prove their consecration to the Father for however long their term of consecration was. And that is what a Nazarite was. It didn't have anything to do with being from Nazareth. Now, in terms of the KJV, you could understand why they put that he would be called a Nazarene, because that's what fits with the scripture, where it says, and he came and dwelt in a city called Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophets, he shall be called a Nazarene. The problem is, or a Nazarene. The problem is that nowhere in the prophets does it say any Messiah was coming that was going to be called a Nazarene. It doesn't say that anywhere in the Old Testament. It doesn't say that anywhere in the books of the prophets. It doesn't say that. And then the Sefer, which restores the Hebrew names for everything, says he shall be called a Netzeri. Now, Netzer is the Hebrew word for, I think, branch or posterity, shoot, offspring, seed. And the footnote that almost every study Bible that I've used has for that particular verse is Isaiah 11:1, and I'm getting ready to go to that now. Isaiah 11, and I'm going to read verses 1 through 14. But a shoot shall grow out of the stump of Jesse, a twig shall sprout from his stalk. The Spirit of the Lord shall alight upon him, a spirit of wisdom and insight, a spirit of counsel and valor, a spirit of devotion and reverence for the Lord. He shall sense the truth by his reverence for the Lord. He shall not judge by what his eyes behold, nor decide by what his ears perceive. Thus he shall judge the poor with equity and decide with justice for the lowly of the land. He shall strike down a land with the rod of his mouth and slay the wicked with the breath of his lips. Justice shall be the girdle of his loins, and faithfulness the girdle of his waist. The wolf shall dwell with the lamb, the leopard lie down with the kid, the calf, the beast of prey, and the fatling together, with a little boy to herd them. The cow and the bear shall graze, their young shall lie down together, and the lion like the ox shall eat straw. A babe shall play over a viper's hole, and an infant pass his hand over an adder's den. In all of my sacred mount, nothing evil or vile shall be done, for the land shall be filled with devotion to the Lord, as water covers the sea. Being an offshoot of Jesse, being of the seed of Jesse, seed of David, being of the line of David, didn't have anything to do with Nazareth at all. Didn't have anything to do with being a Nazarene. So again, that was one of the things that was said that I don't understand why some of these prophecies were used and why they were quoted in the Gospels to appear to have been about Yahusha when they weren't. And it saddens me and breaks my heart in a lot of ways, because we really were taught to praise and worship Yahusha as a God himself. You know, as the Son of God, he is supposed to be God the Son, when we were told over and over and over and over and over and over and over again that there is one God, and he is a jealous God, and he is God all by himself. He said that so many times that we as, which I don't claim that anymore, so I don't really, but anyway, whereas Christians really should wonder, if the Father said the same thing over and over and over again, and he changes not, why he would give them something else to worship. He had Moses lift up, he had Moses create a serpent, a bronze serpent or a brass serpent, whatever it was made out of, so that the people in the wilderness, when he was leading the Hebrews out of Egypt, when they made God angry and the Father sent all them serpents to bite them, he had Moses lift something up so that they could look upon and be healed. And they turned that into a god and worshipped it, which angered the Father, which was said later that that's what they did. And that was one of the things that I think it was King Hezekiah had to tear down, was the statue of Nehushtan, the bronze serpent that they turned into an idol and named Nehushtan and started to worship. And it's interesting because I think I mentioned this in another video, where Yahusha is recorded in the Gospels as having said that just as the serpent was lifted up in the wilderness, so the Son of Man shall be lifted up. And that's what we've been doing. That's what we've been doing. And it breaks my heart because it further highlights what was said in Jeremiah, which was that our people in general, inherited a delusion. They inherited a delusion. And when it says that the Father concealed himself, that really is what he did. And he allowed for us to do this for so many generations, because people really don't want to worship the Father by himself. We have to have something else to go along with him to worship him, and that's not okay, because he is God all by himself. And that's something that we really need to stop doing. We really need to stop doing. And we have to start looking at these scriptures and breaking them down. And, you know, one of the things that my sister, I'm going to use a phrase that my little sister, she says all the time: make it make sense for me. Make it make sense. Make it make sense for me. Because the more I study and read in the Father's Word and compare what's in the Hebrew scriptures of the Old Testament to what we were given in Greek in the New Testament, it really doesn't match up. It doesn't line up, and it is written in such a way that it appears to be very blatant, and that's not okay. And we really have to start examining what we've done and repenting, because from the looks of it, just so far, just with chapters 1 and 2 of Matthew, the New Testament led the world deeper into idolatry and just gave them another delusion, fabricated another idol for people to worship. And that is not okay. It's not okay. I'm going to end it here. And more studying I do, and the more reading I do, and the more questions that I get that I want to talk about, you guys will be seeing more of my face. But I love you, and all of you have the day you deserve. Bye.